All right, well, we're grabbing a couple taller chairs here, but while we do that, I just want to welcome everyone. Thanks so much for coming on behalf of Together for Education in Ames. Myself, Jen, and Cedric, we welcome you this evening. We are so happy to be here with all of you and with the district administrators. We're so thankful that you have welcomed us here to have a conversation. Our mission with Together for Education, we aim to come together as a community around shared goals in education, respect for common humanity, and human dignity. The goal of this forum this evening is to gain an understanding of some questions, concerns that have come from parents, from teachers, from community members. I met with Eric and Superintendent Vincent several weeks ago, and we talked about some of the topics that we had questions on, and then I sent them the questions in advance in order to give them sufficient time in case they needed to look into materials or consult a lawyer or anything like that, and so that it could help consult a thoughtful dialogue this evening. And we do want to recognize that the social justice program that the school implements, it's called Critical Consciousness, and it does have some technical jargon and terminology. So in efforts to just be inclusive to everyone here, if that might not be familiar with that terminology, when you answer questions, if you would be so kind as to use layman's terms so that everyone could understand, that'd be wonderful. My name is Kira Burstein, and I'm a college teaching professor and mother of 3 children in the Ames School District. And I stand up here as a parent today. And like many of you, I care very much about the education of my children and all the children in the district.
And I'm Jen Pinto, and I'm currently a teacher here in Ames. And I, right now, tonight, am standing, or I guess sitting, as a concerned community member.
Cedric, former Ames teacher, and I'm here too as a concerned community member.
And my guess is I shared why I'm here, and I'm confident that there are many people here that share my passion for my children and the education of the children in the district. We care about our schools. People come to Ames from all over the world because of all the goodness that Ames has to offer. And in fact, this is one thing that Dr. Vincent and I connected over when we talked several weeks ago. We're both moms. We care so much about our kids and their education. And so with Together for Education, because we care so much about our children, we feel a sense of responsibility to ask questions on their behalf, on behalf of the teachers. And there's a growing concern towards some of the practices in the district. So our goal this evening is to advocate for high quality education and shed light on some of those concerns. I'm going to say out loud, it is a risk for us to be up here and ask questions, but the risk of remaining silent for us, that we feel that it's worse. So in the long term, we feel that it's important for us to ask questions, to gain understanding, to restore trust, and move towards a road of peace and productivity. So before we start, we've got 5 topic questions. Before we start with that, if you would be so kind as to share your name and your title and your role in the district.
Good evening. I'm Paula Vincent, interim superintendent, and it's a pleasure to be here with you this evening. We didn't quite know how many folks to anticipate, so sorry about this shuffling of the chairs and things, but we look forward to the exchange, and as Kira mentioned, our intention is to try to be here to have open dialogue and conversation. We may not get to everyone's questions this evening at any time. Our addresses are all on our website, or you obviously know how to find us. If we don't get to a particular question, we'd encourage you to send it by email or pick up the phone, whatever's easiest for you. So welcome, and we're happy to be here.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Jeff Hawkins. I'm the assistant superintendent, or the assistant superintendent in the district. Again, I appreciate the opportunity to have a conversation, and I really appreciate the lens of trying to make sure that all of our kids are taken care of in our district.
Thanks so much. And since we opened up for questions for several weeks before and collected those questions. We have the questions collected, so we won't be taking the questions from the group, but so we're prepared to answer those today, or to ask those questions today. So the first question is on the topic of FERPA. If you aren't familiar with what FERPA is, it stands for Family Education Rights and Privacy Act. And this gives parents rights with respect to students' educational records. What you see on the screen is actually directly off of the Ames school website, and it is the right to inspect and review the student's education records within 45 days of the request. And if you're like me and you wonder, well, what's education records? It's defined as those records that are directly related to a student and maintained by an educational institution. So with that, in light of FERPA, the first question that was sent to us here was from a teacher at the middle school. She explained that there are clubs at the middle school that students can participate in, and the students' membership is kept hidden from their parents. She explained that, in fact, some clubs hold meetings during lunchtime that the students can hide their involvement from parents, because if the club was after school, they may need to arrange a ride and the parents would find out. The teacher was told, and actually got an email right here, that if the parent asked about their child's involvement in these clubs, the teacher was not allowed to tell the parent. In fact, the teacher was told to lie to the parents about the involvement. So in this situation, it appears that it's being taught that it's okay to lie to a parent, teaching a child that that's okay. But most importantly, in light of FERPA, is the question just broadly, what rights do parents have with respect to their child's records, and can a teacher be required to withhold information from a parent?
So several things when we get started. One, a member of our team that didn't get a chance to introduce himself, I want to make sure you all know Eric Smith, our Director of Communication, who's been instrumental in helping to coordinate the events and will help join in some of the responses. So I just want to make sure he's acknowledged. There's also maybe a couple of ground rules that maybe I should state up front. When it comes to specific issues of either a staff member or a student member, I think you would appreciate that we will not respond to those, and that's just a protection of their privacy and their rights. But we'll do our best to generally respond to the questions as they're presented. I would just say to you as an educator, I am a little offended here of an accusation that we encourage our teachers to lie. If there is that kind of behavior, that would cross the line of ethical educative behavior. I would hope you would report that immediately to the person that you believe did that. If it's one of our teachers, they should certainly go to their supervisor and address that. And if they don't get resolution, just like any of you and your probably businesses or practices, try to resolve it at the lowest possible level, face-to-face with people. Then you move it through the chain. But that to me would be a very serious violation of our ethical responsibilities as educators. So I hope that is not the case, and if there is an instance, please do follow that chain of command. With FERPA, as Kira stated, FERPA addresses student records specifically. I printed this out just as an example. We have a little bit on our website. It's really easy to find some of the detail about FERPA if you just Google it or go to education.gov, and all of the federal law comes up. But it gives us very specific guidelines about what is a student record, what can be released, what can be withheld. And in most instances, it deals for us as a school system very frequently what I'll call student records that are directory type information. And it tells us what can go in our publications, where we have to have consent for those, places where families can exclude their students' information from our publications. So I don't know if you have more specifics about that. I think Dr. Hawkins also has a specific reference to our board policy if you want to ask about that in particular as well. But it really is a safeguard or a protection for families, and again, we'd be happy to address some specifics if you have them. Generally, and if it's about a particular situation you've encountered, I encourage you to come to us directly.
Oh, did you have something? Go ahead.
The only thing I would add is that our local board policy 506.1 on student records aligns really well with FERPA legislation, and discusses all the same things and outlines those rights for parents to access their children's records. Maybe the one caveat sometimes I find myself in these conversations is what parents have the right is to access their children's records. They don't have the right to access other children's records. So sometimes a record might be like a video. And if other students' records are contained within that video, sometimes we find ourselves having to like describe what's happening rather than actually release or have somebody see the video, because we can't violate these students' rights in order to adhere to this parent's FERPA rights. But that'd be the only caveat that I'd add in the conversation.
So I was so glad to hear that you share the concern that we wouldn't want to lie to parents. So I was glad to hear that. And it sounds like what you're saying is if we suspect that would that's happening, the chain of command or the proper appropriate action would be to go to the administrator at that building if there is a parent that is concerned about records being withheld. And because you're saying that parents do have that right to their child's records.
Absolutely.
Okay, well that provides great clarity. And so I think that if there are clubs like that, I think it sounds like what we can conclude is that we need to seek out the building administrator, because what I've described here is not consistent with FERPA. So thank you so much for that clarity. Our second question is on the topic of free speech, etc.
Okay. One more time, my name is Sabra Aleman. For those who are not familiar with my experience as a teacher in the Ames Community School District last spring, I made a Facebook post stating that I was happy, still happy, that there were some teachers who were brave enough not to teach the Wednesday of the BLM agenda that was scheduled for that day. The following day, I was called to a Zoom meeting with the principal and HR director, and I was reprimanded. She asked me why I was happy that there were some teachers that did not teach on transgender topics. I told her that I don't think that this is an age appropriate for elementary children. I told her that I love all children. It doesn't matter to me what they look like or what they think, and I will do my job to teach the children the academic content. She said that she was disappointed that as a minority, I would not support this work. I found that conflicting that she would be disappointed, and I suggested that, I found that conflicting that she should suggest that I have to believe what she believes just because we both have brown skin. This is the very type of thing that we are trying to move away from in the district. That's what I thought. Then she told me that this is a district directive and that I have to leave my opinions at the door. I told her that I can do my job and teach the children the content, but my beliefs go with me wherever I go. She then asked me for the names. This was the director of HR, asked me for the names of the teachers who did not teach on these topics. I would not give the names to her. I would not give the names to her. When she told me to take my post down, I respectfully declined. If you are not familiar completely, you can listen to our first episode of our podcast for the audio conversation with the principal. Then, this fall, the district passed an employee expression policy which states that employee expression on social media platforms that interferes with or has an adverse impact on district's operation and or negatively impacts the employee ability to perform their job for the district or prevent the districts from functioning efficiently and effectively may result in disciplinary action up to and including termination, which when they said to me, this wasn't in place, so that was wrong for them to do that to me. It was brought to my attention that there are employees who have spoken on social media with very bold statements. I have 2 examples here. The counselor Jean Mohammed, for example, said, a quick glimpse into our interracial marriage. Me, going to give Abdullah a kiss goodnight.
I'm sorry, but we're gonna have to interrupt. As I stated at the top, we can't talk about individual.
We're not asking you to talk about this, he's talking about it.
I'm not.
But-
Slow down.
But you're in our place and we are trying to be responsive to the question and have dialogue we can't be a part of conversations about individuals.
The question is not about an individual, this is an example to give context. So everyone can see what they say, and so now your question is?
Yeah, so I will move on from this.
Staff member, so we can't be a part of that.
So my question is, with those examples in mind, how will you prevent
It's
a
off
double
the
standard?
screen, it's off the screen. It looks like you're looking for a reason to end this as quickly as possible. Which is also,
I would really appreciate just a dialogue, but it cannot be about individual students or individual staff members. I felt like we made that clear, more than willing to have a conversation about free speech and how we.
great, here's your question. Okay, free speech.
So my question,
I guess what I would stress is, what I personally would like is what you led in with, a positive and productive conversation around, so I personally, I'll just own this personally, I personally find the lead-ins to the general questions that we were provided, not to be the positive, productive lead-in that you
What
suggested.
you
with your
say
design.
in the department all the time is, or in the district all the time, is that sometimes we have to feel uncomfortable and we've got to lean into those conversations. I've heard you say that time and time again, is that that's how we can move forward towards inclusivity, towards belonging to all people. And if you're uncomfortable, what I encourage you to do is exactly what you recommend, just to lean into that. And I'm not asking, no one's asking me anything specifically. This is a general question, go ahead and ask.
so after I read what I read and you also the examples, how will you prevent a double standard from being used to judge employees' social media and free speech? I'm just here as I said, as a former teacher before in the district, but I am also want to protect the other teachers that are in the district that are still like, they ask me for names to share, I'm not sharing the names, but they're still communicating with me, and I want to, do this for them. Like, how are you going to prevent the double standard from being used to judge employees, social media, and free speech?
So make it clear for folks, incidences that are in our past, I don't have firsthand knowledge of, so I'm not gonna try to respond to things I don't know about, and again, will not comment on particular incidences that may have occurred with either employees or students. We do have board policies that provide guidance to our staff. We try to encourage them to be thoughtful about, it's really hard for our public. If I happen to be the interim superintendent, when I say something on social media, it's difficult for people to sort out, is that my belief? Is that the school district's belief? So we encourage people to be cautious about that. The policies come from legal guidance, and they're very much in line with all the rights and responsibilities that we all have as citizens. So I'm hoping that while we all have our own opinions, we try to follow the laws as they are and try to be respectful, and that same guideline or support is there. If one of our employees feels like they have been discriminated against or is being treated differently with our laws, they have those same protections to ask for that information to be investigated and resolved to protect their rights too. So I guess I don't share your premise that we have a double standard. Again,
That was not the question, that's not the question. The question is not past tense, it's moving forward, which is your responsibility. You passed it in October.
We will follow our policies, and again, if someone thinks we have violated rights, here's the procedures that are there. Carrie, I must say, we've done 7 or 8 of these in the community, and we've had great exchanges, and we don't always agree. We don't need to always agree. I'm very interested in hearing the voice, but it's difficult to hear the voice if everything is premised in the negative or with assumptions. I'm going to try really hard not to make judgments. I would hope that same courtesy would be afforded us as we move forward.
These aren't judgments, they're practical, specific applications, but the question still remains, who will be the judge? And how will this be regulated moving forward, given this policy that was passed in October? That's the question. So you said I can't speak for things in the past, which sure, but who will be the judge of social media posts by employees, and with what criteria will they make those judgments?
We don't make it a habit to judge employees' posts anyway. If it affects our business in the school district or gets brought to our attention as a concern, we may feel obligated to investigate. But that's why you have a policy. It gives you specific guidance on how you investigate that. But we don't have any mechanism where we're trying to police individual staff member posts.
Okay, thank you. What the policy says, one more time specifically, is employee expression on social media platforms that interferes with or has adverse impacts on district operations and or negative impacts on employees' ability to perform the job for the district may result in disciplinary action up to and including termination. So the question is, who makes those determinations if it's a negative post? Who decides?
If it causes disruption within the system and comes to our attention, it comes up through the system. Certainly administratively, we would be charged with making an interpretation of that. Our board would be the ultimate group that would hear that concern and render judgment.
Okay, and you're saying at this time, the board would ultimately make the decision and you don't have criteria to base that on at this time?
I don't think that's what I said. I said we have a policy that specifies it would follow that chain of command, but ultimately, if the decision that we make, the employee wanted to continue to appeal that, they could do that through the system all the way through the board level. And the board then would stand as the body that would determine what's that outcome. Typically, that is, as you might anticipate, is done with the support of legal guidance through that process. Often, if it's an employee, employer, there's usually attorneys on both sides, but that is the process, and the policy is the guidance.
Okay, so just one last time to give you an opportunity. With what criteria will it be decided if it's negative or not? With what criteria?
It's really specific to a situation, and you use professional judgment and you use information that you gain through an investigation.
Okay, so that answers the question. So it sounds like it is the judgment of administrators then sending it ultimately to the board and they use their own personal judgment.
I'll just stop there. It's informed judgment based on legal counsel, on guidance. But at some point, we are professionals. We do use that to say, at what level of disruption was it to the system? Does it violate any existing federal or state laws? That's the type of criteria that's used.
State laws, that's more objective. Okay, the next question is on the topic of adultism, Jim.
Yes. So a question from a concerned parent at the middle school who brought us a question related to a topic their child was taught on called adultism. If you're like me, and this is a new concept to you, I'll define it for you. Adultism refers to behaviors and attitudes based on the assumption that adults are better than young people and entitled to act upon young people without their agreement. Adultism is analogous to sexism or racism, but toward children. I think it's important to pause and say out loud that there are instances of child abuse by adults, and schools should recognize those cases and report them to DHS. However, the teaching of this topic goes far beyond warning children of child abuse. In fact, the article reads, if you think about it, you will realize that except for prisoners, young people are more controlled than any other group in society. Most young people are told what to eat, what to wear, when to go to bed, when they can talk, that they will go to school, which friends are okay, and when they are to be in the house. The opinions of most young people are not valued. They are punished at the will or whim of adults. Their emotions are considered immature. In addition, adults reserve the right to punish and take away privileges when such actions are deemed to be instrumental in controlling or disciplining them. If this were a description of the way a group of adults were treated, we would all agree that their oppression was almost total. But for the most part, the adult world considers this treatment of young people acceptable because we were treated in much the same way and internalize the idea that that's the way you treat kids. We need to hold adultism up to a strong limit. It is disrespect of the young. Now, the paper goes on to continue to pit children up against parents. So my question is, can you tell us why you allow a curriculum that teaches children that adults who set boundaries for them are oppressing them?
I have no knowledge of adultism within our approved curriculum, but actually it's the first time I've heard the term, so I'm not able to comment.
Dr. Hawkins?
Parallel yet. Have no idea of the term before you put it up on the board.
Interesting. Any parents in here talked with Dr. Hawkins about adultism before? A few. Okay.
And quite frankly, I would say that's why we asked for questions, so we could respond intelligently to the questions. So I don't know that this was one I was prepared to speak to today.
Hopefully, in the future, the director of curriculum would have a stronger sense of curriculum that's taught in the middle school, especially on topics like this. Next question on transparency, Jen.
The district has 3 new school board members that ran for office on a platform of transparency. Related to transparency, the district used to send the equity newsletters to all employees, but this year the district has stopped sending the letters to staff, the EAs. And now only send the letters to teachers, admin, and board members. In addition, last year the BLM material was freely available for all parents and tax-paying community members to view. This year, the equity materials are blocked in Google Drive. Furthermore, when parents and community members submit open records requests, they are never answered. This is publicly funded school that is legally required to provide documentation related to curriculum of students and staff when requested. These practices are not consistent with FERPA or the open records laws. So can you help us understand why documents are locked and why open records requests are not fulfilled?
I'm going to start with the open records request. All of those requests come to my attention. We have dozens that we've received this fall, which is fine. That's, that is an expectation. I'm not aware of a single one that has not been responded to. There are some times when our response is, we believe you asked for this, and it is not an open records request. If it's something that really is public information that we can share, typically we go ahead and share it anyway. We just clarify it really isn't available as an open records request. Again, if you have a particular situation where you think a record hasn't been provided, I would really encourage you to bring it to our attention. But we have, I wouldn't say dozens every week, maybe a dozen or so every month, and I've watched those since I've been here in July, move back and forth very frequently. I forget the second part of your question.
Why are the documents locked?
There are some documents on our website that we use intra-district that are for our teaching staff, and there are sometimes documents that are for the public. We do distinguish. I would think, again, most any business probably has their internal documents, probably has their public documents. That's how we do distinguish some things. If they aren't for student use, or if they aren't for outside the district use, those are documents that we will distribute among ourselves.
If they're curriculum based, are those supposed to be unlocked for parents to see? That's a question I have.
Curriculum, of course, is governed by our state law and is very specific about how that can be shared. That is different than internal district communications.
Who should we contact with that when those things are locked?
If you have something that you have an interest in, maybe it'd be a classroom material, maybe it'd be a district material, take it to the source that's closest to that source. If it's a classroom, I would encourage you to visit with that student's teacher. If it's more district, That's where our director of communications fields a lot of those. Again, a lot of those things end up in the superintendent's office. Just take it to the closest available link to what the particular question might be.
All right, that's helpful, thank you. Next topic is on equity. So the district has discussed the disparities between students by race, that Hispanic and African American students score lower on academic measures than white and Asian. And so these slides are just screenshotted from that data. There's also data that's been reported that there is a disparity in the disciplinary actions, things like detentions and suspensions. And so we commend the district on finding and being the awareness of these gaps, and we also support, we share that in closing that achievement gap and across all different measures. We have some questions about the methods that are used to close and address that problem. Whether or not the methods are have been supported with research to show that those are effective means, whether or not they're consistent with discrimination laws, and then also related to House File 802 and whether or not they are consistent with that law. And just because there may be people here that aren't familiar with that law, 802, House File 802 was passed, a bill in Iowa, and went effective in July. And it is specifically to ensure that districts do several important things. One of them is that the superintendent must ensure that any curriculum or mandatory staff or student training by a school district does not teach, advocate, encourage, promote, or act upon specific stereotyping and scapegoating towards others on the basis of demographic membership or identity. This means that a school cannot assign fault, blame, or bias upon a person based on their race or sex, or suggest that by virtue of their race or sex that they are inherently racist or inclined to oppress others. Schools cannot also teach that the United States or the state of Iowa is fundamentally or systemic racist. Now, good news is that schools can and should still have diversity trainings and work to foster a respectful workplace environment, and schools should still continue, of course, teaching on what racism is and teaching civil rights, the history, and about racism in this country and in the world. And we, like the district, we support that as well. The law requires that this content is taught in a way that does not teach students and teachers that they themselves are racist, oppressors, or oppressed because of what they look like today. So that's just to clarify what that law is specifically. Now, with that background in mind, I have had the opportunity to participate in some parent equity meetings. Glad the district is involving parents. And so getting a chance to take a look at what that looks like, and it's an effort to close that achievement gap. Dr. Jones is the director of the equity department and is presented this presentation, and it sounds like since it's a curriculum that should be something that is publicly available. He, after sharing the disparities, asked the question and also answered the question, why do these disparities exist, which is an important question to ask. The next couple slides here, these are all from this training, and as well as trainings for staff, equity trainings for staff as well. So he says, what we want to do is move away from a deficit mindset when answering this question and move towards having a critically conscious lens. And so you'll hear the district as well talks a lot about critical consciousness. And so what is that exactly for those of us that it might be new to? He says that a deficit mindset is when a person concludes that disparities are due to the things that are listed on the left. So that perhaps a child lives in a single parent home, they have low socioeconomic status, there is low engagement with parents, etc. So these are things that we want to move away from. And he says that what we want to move towards is having a critically conscious lens, which is the reasons on the right. So the reasons for the disparities that are listed there are because of teacher biases. Teachers don't have high enough standards for students of color. These students may not have access to high quality teaching. So with that, I'll just let him actually explain.
Critical consciousness. Critical consciousness is the willingness and ability to see how power
I'm
and
going to start that over.
So what is critical consciousness? Critical consciousness is the willingness and ability to see how power and privilege are at work to systematically advantage some while simultaneously disadvantaging others.
So the definition is still on the screen there. If you could clarify for us, because this is a training that's gone through the whole district, who are the people that are in power and privilege? Who is that specifically?
First, just to clarify a comment, the critical consciousness work, I do believe, began in the district some years ago, and then we had the pandemic, which kind of disrupted things. I wouldn't say at this point that the training has been through the whole district. We're continuing to provide opportunities and will be for the next several months. And of course, with any training, it's that kind of recursive cycle of you always have people coming and leaving the system that would continue. This is an area of great passion for me, and it has gone by different terms at different decades of education, and you probably noticed I've experienced a few of those decades, but the analogy for me is that works well is if you think about the iceberg picture, and I would guess you all have been exposed to that notion too. When you see the iceberg, we usually can see some part of it that's above the water, and we know there's this whole piece that might be below the water. Obviously, we've learned that that's how icebergs are formed. And critical consciousness, in my mind, is a way to be curious, to think about, okay, I can see this much, or I understand this much of a system. I wonder what else might be going on. And just to approach items, whether I'm teaching in the classroom, or whether I'm working on a system, which of course is a lot of my work as a superintendent, to be curious about, are we in any way creating barriers or not opening up doorways that would allow children to thrive, or for our staff to do their best work. Those are the responsibilities of us as a system. So the terminology can change, different things become popular at different times, but the passion for me is always trying to be responsible as educators to how do we help kids thrive, and how do we take them from wherever they might be to open up their gateways of opportunity as they go through our system and hopefully are prepared to leave the system.
Thank you. So just to stay focused on the question, who are the people in power that are in this definition here? The power and privilege, who are those people specifically?
I don't think that's a specific reference. I think that's kind of like the eye of the beholder. At any given time, any one of us can consider a situation through a lens of, are there things I could do to make it better? Am I myself in any way passing judgments? Again, I go back to that word of curiosity. Is there any way to open up our curiosity and be a more inclusive system?
Okay, so it could be anyone. How about, so anyone could be at work to being systematically working to advantage some while disadvantaging others. Who are being disadvantaged?
I don't have a specific answer.
You don't? Okay, maybe Dr. Jones will. We've got the next slide here.
Some aspects of critical consciousness include self-awareness, self-evaluation, recognizing our own biases, and understanding power and privilege. Now, what do we mean by understanding power and privilege? Well, basically, we should understand that we all have biases. Although everyone has biases, the power associated with dominant group identities, along with the institutional power possessed by those groups, enable the biases of some, not all, some individuals to contribute to reproducing or sustaining systems that oppress minoritized groups and benefit dominant groups.
So he provides more clarity there, but still the question is, people in power and privilege, he says, are the dominant group identities. Who are the dominant group identities?
Again, I think this concept is global, and so what groups or what identities are in power or have privilege in maybe one country, one community are going to be different than others, right? And so I don't know that this concept of critical consciousness is intended to say that there's always one particular identity that would be associated with privilege or power or disadvantaged. And those situations, as I think you pointed out really well, if we're doing our work as a system, we minimize any situations where any groups of people are advantaged or disadvantaged, but we work towards the betterment of all.
So you don't know who the dominant group identities are or the minoritized groups?
I think your question was who is referred to through critical consciousness as a dominant group or a disadvantaged group.
So yes, he's teaching about critical consciousness and that we should all work to have that. So who are the dominant group identities? And then my next question was then, he says that they're working to oppress the minoritized groups. And if this was the answer to the question, why do these disparities exist? Well, remember that we're talking about racial disparities. So can you shed some light on that, please?
No.
No, you won't, or no, you don't know?
No, I can't shed any light on that because I don't know. I can't tell, since I didn't sit in on this meeting, and I don't believe this was a staff training that I sat in on, if this was a generalized conversation about the concept or about how it's applied to our local situations. I can't provide any additional context, I'm sorry.
Okay, we've got some more slides that might help prompt your memory because these sessions happen continuously, regularly. They happen at school board meetings, they happen at PD, and now this is from a parent equity training that I was a part of. And so
Yeah, I didn't sit in on this training, so it's not going to prompt my memory about this conversation.
So how will you answer the question, why do these disparities exist, and then use this definition to help solve it without knowing who those people are?
You know, it's an interesting situation when you have standards in a school system and you also recognize you have students that aren't meeting the standards. We probably don't spend that much time on asking all the reasons why. Our interest is what could we do as a system that might allow children to grow in the way that we want to. So, you know, quite honestly, the question about why do we have the disparities, we try to look at our system to say, are there any things that we might be doing that are getting in the way? Again, either for our staff to do their best work or for our students to learn at the best rate. But we don't spend a huge amount of time trying to determine what caused the situation. We try to take kids where they are and keep them moving as quickly as we can towards the desired standards.
So the first question, just to go back, was why do these disparities exist? The answer was because of deficit thinking that we should move towards critical consciousness. That's why the disparities exist. I'm glad you're trying to get to the bottom of why the disparities exist because we can't solve the problem until we know that answer. And then this was the answer that was given because teachers have biases, there's systemic racism, and so if that's the case, well, who is it so that we can solve the problem? And to have these answers to the question, why do these disparities exist? So these are the answers that are listed: because of educator biases, because of systemic racism in the school, among other things. Both of you have PhDs, so you understand research methods. You know that it is easy to identify differences between groups with academic scores. There's frequencies and descriptive statistics. This group scores this on average, this group scores this. So you've identified that, and again, we commend that. In order to make a causal statement about why a phenomena occurs, we know that we have to have an experimental design in order to answer the question, why do these disparities exist? So in order to have that answer there, we would have had to have had an experimental design where children are put into a treatment and a control group. In this scenario, we would have had to have children who are put into a treatment group where there is a teacher with biases or racism, or there's systemic racism in that environment, and then a child who's put into a classroom where there's not systemic racism, where there's not biases. And then we would have to compare pre-academic scores and post-academic scores, and then compare differences to see what exactly is the cause of the phenomena, that being the difference in scores between students. So without an experimental design, I'm curious to know how those things are listed there. Without an experimental design, we have confounding variables. Put another way, there are alternative explanations for the cause of a particular phenomenon. So in order to list those things there, have you done that research to uncover that it's the educator biases that cause those disparities?
I'm conscious of our time, and I know you had a few other questions we haven't gotten to. I don't have more to add to that topic. I do have this to say about, as educators, our subjects, if you will, our students are humans, they're our children, we care about them. It's not the same as doing research in a laboratory at all. What we do try to do is to form hypotheses about, so if we have some students that aren't reading as well as we'd like them to be, what could we do that might make a difference? And we can certainly do research at that level to try to see if we do a certain intervention or try a certain methodology, do we get the outcomes that we want? We certainly don't engage in the type of research that you were describing.
Right. The district does pride itself in evidence-based practice, and so it would be the hope that someone has done research on this topic that would drive that you would use this particular intervention, which is critical consciousness training. So that would be the hope, but I haven't heard the evidence that supports why you've chosen this intervention to close the gap. I haven't heard a direct answer to that question, so I'm just going to, like you said, for the sake of time, just keep moving on. In this training, critical consciousness, they actually opened up with a land acknowledgement that Ames School District was built on stolen land from Native Americans, and that the United States and Iowa is systemically racist and was built on racism and anti-Black. So those were comments at that meeting. Continuing forward, these are equity, what are called look-fors in the district. The red arrow is pointing to what the teachers are regularly told to make sure that they are exposing truth and not whitewashing history. So if you're not familiar with what whitewashing history is, the article is linked right there. This is the article that helps teachers to know what they should not do. So what is whitewashing? The idea that white people would choose not to uplift stories that make them uncomfortable, which is in line with the concept of a white fragility, and white fragility as reasons for whitewashing Black history. So, in addition to that, the author of this article says that white people in America need to take off the rose-colored glasses and see the nation for what it truly is. This next document is an audit, an equity audit used. This is hanging up in faculty rooms to remind teachers what to look for as they put their plans together. Just to look at the first bullet, it says, in my plans or materials, I do not say or suggest that members of the oppressive group are kind, humane, or fair. We haven't gotten a clear definition of who those are, who the oppressive group is from our administrators here, but the articles that we're citing do shed light on that. There's more that also helps to uncover that. Equity newsletters that are sent out regularly and the resources that are involved in those. They have books, they have podcasts. Here's one podcast, for example. This podcast is called Nice White Parents. And so in the introduction for this even, it says, when we look for what is broken, for how our schools are failing, we focus on who they're failing. Poor kids, black kids, and brown kids. We ask, why aren't they performing better? These are not the right questions. There is a powerful force that's shaping our public schools, arguably the most powerful force. If you want to understand why our schools aren't better, that's where you have to look. You have to look at white parents. Another book, and there's so many, we would be here for days, but I just selected a few. How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram X. Kendi. It's critical for white people, for people in general, to stop denying their racist ideas, to stop denying the ways in which policies have benefited them, to stop denying their racism, and realize that the very heartbeat of racism is denial, and the sound of that heartbeat is, I'm not racist. So within this concept of critical consciousness, if you deny that you are racist, then that is taken as evidence that you are racist, which is, actually it's called the Kafka trap, and it's a rhetorical semantics game where if you say that you are not X, that's evidence that you are X, because someone who is X would say that they're not X. So it's a rhetorical trap. Another book, White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo. Racism is a white problem. It was constructed and created by white people, and the ultimate responsibility lies with white people. For too long, we've looked at it as if it were someone else's problem, as if it were created in a vacuum, and I want to push against that narrative. If you're like me and you're confused about that's why I asked the question, where's the research that supports these ideas? I have yet to find it. That's why I'm here. That's why we're all asking, where's the research? Where's the evidence to support this? This article from the Iowa State Daily quotes Dr. Jones, who says that in response to the title of the article is Ames School District officials stand behind their Black History Month week of action despite criticism. What he explains is that what we are doing is bringing ideology into the conversation, but not just ideology, we're bringing people. He goes on to say, and if that's political, then yes, it's political. So he doesn't say, hey, we do have evidence to support this is going to be an effective intervention to close that gap. He says, we're teaching an ideology. We're teaching politics. I mean, he directly says that. Interesting that it was mentioned that all staff don't go through this training. This is from last week, the staff training. It was announced that all staff will engage in critical consciousness training during the 22-23 year, among other ideological content that is listed on this slide, which would take a lot more time to go over. So, with that content in mind, can you help us understand, in the context of 802, that how these teachings, these documents, how is it consistent with 802, which says that there's no stereotyping, no racial scapegoating, and discriminatory types of language? Can you help us understand that?
I will certainly offer my point of view, and these will be our final comments as we approach our ending time. 802 to me, if you read it carefully, of course we have had to, because it was a new law for us and we needed to understand the guidance it provided. It very much reinforced the notion in our country that we are a place of freedom of speech. It also offered guidelines to us to be careful in our freedom of speech that we didn't make some of the judgments that are specified in the law. But just as you saw the examples of some of the curriculum materials that could be out there, books, those sorts of things, they are part of the freedom of speech. We don't always agree with all of them. We might have concerns about some of them. We try to make sure that our staff use age-appropriate materials, don't engage in the ideology as much as material that aligns with our standards. But 802 has caused us to look at all of our things with the lens of, is there anything here that in any way would cross that line that's specified in 802? But mostly, that law, as we've applied it, has just been to reinforce the rights of families, the rights of us as educators, to continue to enjoy the freedoms that we have in this great republic of our country. So with that, I am going to close. I very much appreciate the opportunity. I think we got through the 5 questions that we were given. I appreciate you may have some specifics. I'd be happy to stand around for a little bit if anyone wants to come ask a direct question. But again, thank you for that, and encourage you to continue to be a voice in the community. Help us understand where you have concerns. We probably won't agree on everything, but I also firmly believe that as adults, that's what I say in the room tonight, we can engage in conversations. I will pledge to you that I will listen, and I would hope that you would afford me that same opportunity. And over time, if we're willing to learn together, we build the kind of community we all want to be a part of. So thank you very much for this opportunity.
If you could just have a seat for a second, and as I could so politely ask you, you were not prepared with materials. We got started late. You couldn't find the button to turn on the mic. And so things like that, if you would show some respect to the people that have come here today, that have real concerns and there is trust to repair in this district. And so by walking out on us, that is not a way to repair that trust.
I will be right at the back door for anyone that wants to come and visit, and I'm happy to stay for whatever length of time someone wants to. Thank you.
I just wanted to also say thank you. I really appreciate that last comment, right? We are a community school district. We have responsibilities to rebuild trust and to make sure that our district is serving all of our children and our families. So I appreciate the beginning of the conversation. My guess is that we may need to have additional conversation, and that is perfectly fine. And I appreciate the fact that I've heard several times that there's a lens for how do we help make sure that all of our students are successful in this district, even if there may be some disagreement on those strategies and methods. I appreciate the question of what is the basis for why we choose those strategies, and I think that those are questions that our community deserves to have. I apologize that I don't know that I can speak as intelligently tonight about them, but I do think that our community deserves to know, why are we choosing the strategies that we're using? What's the research base, or what's the evidence base of those? So I appreciate those questions. I will tell you, I have a son who I'm hoping to catch in the second half of a playoff game to go to state, and so I'm gonna politely exit. I too would be welcome to have other conversations, and if there's individual concerns that were kind of brought up at the beginning, if those can't be addressed at the building level or with somebody directly, I would encourage people to reach out to me. Thank you so much for being on.
What if there was an evidence-based approach that could close the gap, that doesn't violate laws, that brings us together around a common goal? There is research that's been done on this topic. Dr. Roland Fryer he is an economist at Harvard, award-winning an economist who does research on the topic of racial disparities in education. The title of his paper, Racial Inequalities in the 21st Century, The Declining Significance of Discrimination. They have very encouraging results. What you can see in this study is that the top line is the mean academic score for white students. The bottom line, the dotted line, is the mean score for black students. Black students are the blue line. They were taken out and randomly assigned to either an enriched or they stayed in the control group, the same environment, the learning environment they were in. And that blue line, as you can see, The students that were in the intervention in the enriched learning environment, it took 3 to 4 years and they closed the gap and passed white students. So this was encouraging. So then the question that was asked in this study was, what exactly was it specifically that was done that was different than the control group? Because we need to put our finger on that so that we can replicate that. There was 5 things, 5 tenets. The first thing was more time spent in school. They increased the length of the school day, the number of weeks in the year, and so the school year was increased. They had double the amount of time on task. The second thing, and I'll just note that our school actually just recently shortened the school day. The second thing was small group tutoring. Instead of hiring more administrators to make fancy graphs and give presentations, they hired more tutors to work directly with students in small groups of less than 6 to give individualized instruction. The third thing was they worked with teachers directly to design plans for individual students. They reinforced those teachers and recognized them when they saw these improvements, and then teachers who didn't have the same success were then worked with more directly. The fourth thing was data-driven instruction. So students were assessed more frequently, 4 to 6 weeks, and they were tested on the content. And then, if there was areas where there was deficit, they were worked with in their tutoring groups. Instead of in our district, 2 time points. Generally, at the beginning of the year, the end of the year, they do math testing. The fifth thing was culture and expectations. Instead of teaching students that they're permanently oppressed because of what they look like, the culture and expectations in this study were to teach children the value of their education. And they still provided empathy. Students had hard times, came from hard home situations, and they empathized and then said, now it's time to do the Pythagorean theorem. So these 5 components were then tested with the same researcher, Roland Fryer. He went to Houston, Texas, and implemented this in grades 6 and 9. What the results showed, as you can see, is the 2, it's probably hard to read from where you are, the 2 tall bar lines demonstrated grade 6 and 9 math scores and the improvement from the Black students. And in 1 year with this intervention, they closed the gap by 2/3. And yeah, so that's exciting. So what we are hopeful for is that our district can find research-based interventions to close those gaps, because they are important. All of our children are important. We need to attend to the children that are on all ends of the spectrum, and so can we do it in a way that's consistent with the law, in a way that brings our school together instead of dividing, labeling, and pitting people up against each other. And just what I wanted to close with, I had a friend that sent me a song recently, and it is relevant to our topic today, so I just want to share a little clip from it and just read a few lines, unless you want me to sing. Just kidding. Okay. It's for King and Country. It's called Relate. I don't know what it's like to be you. You don't know what it's like to be me. What if we're all the same in different kind of ways? Can you relate? We both know what it's like to be hurt. We both know what it's like to feel pain. But I think it's safe to say we're on to better days. I don't know what it's like to be you. You don't know what it's like to be me. But by the grace of God, we'll see each other's hearts. To the parents here this evening, I think that Stephen Covey was spot on. Got a quote from him as well. That he said about parenting, even with the difficult moments, raising children is the greatest thing that we'll ever do. It's greater than any milestone you can hit in your career. It dwarfs any fame you might receive for your ideas. You've been handed a piece of history in advance, a gracious gift that you send to a time that you will not see, and you play the biggest role in how that history will ultimately be recorded. It is our hope, parents, tonight, that we will continue to collaborate with every one of you, community members. We have grandparents here, and we are so grateful that you are working together for our community and the children in this community. We just want to remind our administrators, if they can hear me out in the hallway there, that these are our children. They're our children, and we hope that they can have respect for the diverse homes that these children come from. All the families here are different, and that's great. That's what makes our community so rich. And we are thankful for their time and that they met with us this evening. I also want to give a big thank you to our teachers who love on our kids every day. And so with that, again, we want to leave behind division, segregation, labels, stereotyping. We want to come together as one school in one community for the education and the future of our children. We are so grateful for your time and collaboration today. Thanks for coming, everyone.